people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Reigning WBA minimum weight champion Senicia Estrada says, I hope Esparza gets all the belts at 112 pounds. I can go whoop her ass again and take them.
Marlen's got the WBA and WBC titles at 112 pounds.
I hope she gets the belts at 112 because then I can go whoop her ass again and take those belts. Estrada told BoxingScene.com. The itty-bitty 108-pound cherry will go up to 112
and whoop your ass.
Somehow their rivalry has generated even more animosity after having already settled their differences in the ring. A true grudge match lived up to the growing animosity through their November 2019 interim flyweight title fight, ended with Houston's Esparza unable to continue after the 9th round due to a gruesome cut suffered by Esparza earlier in the bout. Estrada, who proudly represents East Los Angeles, won a technical decision.
I think Marlen has improved since then.
To some degree. She's at least a more experienced fighter now than she was then when she fought Senicia, but the same applies to Senicia.
She's become even more lethal and more experienced.
Upon her ring return, which is being eyed for July, with or without Golden Boy along for the ride, Estrada intends to finish what she started at strawweight in her quest to become a 3-division undisputed champion. I would like to stick to one weight class, get the belts there, and then move up, admits Estrada. Sometimes it's hard to do that because you can't get the other champions in the ring. So if they don't want to fight, then you have to look at moving up in weight for the next fight. It's a good thing to be able to fight at 105, 108, or 112 pounds. I know I can beat everyone at those weights.
I have to agree, Senicia Estrada is the most dangerous fighter anywhere between 105 and 112 pounds.
She's fucking lethal. And the more experience she gains, the more lethal she becomes. I like the idea of Senicia staying at 105 pounds for the time being to unify that weight class because it is a division that stands divided. There are 4 world champions there.
And she's just one among them.
You notice that they said she's set to return in July with or without Golden Boy Promotions along for the ride. We know that Senicia Estrada has been discontent as of late. Financial issues that Golden Boy Promotions must resolve for their relationship to continue. And I told you, I've heard rumors, I've heard rumblings that she might make the same move that Franchon Cruz did. Franchon Cruz, who was a Golden Boy Promotions fighter up until her very last fight. That was part of a Matchroom show.
Yeah, Taylor versus Serrano.
Could Senicia Estrada end up making the same move that Franchon Cruz did? From Golden Boy Promotions over to Matchroom. Same platform, different outfit.
She might.
And if she does, that Marlen Esparza fight might become a little bit more difficult to make. It might very well become a fight that is out of reach. If it's Senicia Estrada's intention for the immediate future to become the minimum weight division's undisputed champion, well, that'll keep her busy for a while.
3 champions there for her to fight.
I heard a rumor that the next champion she might face is Germany's own Tina Ruprecht. The longest reigning champion in today's minimum weight division. Tina Ruprecht procured that WBC title in September of 2018.
She's got a win over Yokasta Valle that's aging nicely.
She beat Yokasta some years ago, and they were supposed to fight again, but the pandemic shut all of that down. Better still, Yokasta, since having lost that fight to Tina, she saw herself become this division's IBF champion. That's what I mean when I say that it's a victory that's aging well. And when it comes to Yokasta, late last year the news was that they were supposed to kick off this year making a fight between her and Senicia. That didn't happen. We're about 5-6 months into the year of 2022, and
you see what's going on.
The rumor I heard is that Senicia may very well participate in a unification fight in her very next fight, but it won't be against Yokasta. It'll be against Tina. And I just so happen to think that Tina, Tiny Tina Ruprecht of Germany, reigning WBC minimum weight champion, She is a better fighter than Yokasta Valle, and that's proven because she beat her.
So if it turns out to be Tina instead of Yokasta, I'm happy with that.
And if Senicia Estrada's next fight is promoted by either Golden Boy Promotions or Matchroom, I'm happy with either. I just want to see her get back to action, doing what she does best, taking names and kicking ass.
Though if it's her aim to eventually fight Marlene again for Marlene's belt...
Well, jumping into bed with Matchroom might hamper those plans.
I'm just being honest. Golden Boy Promotions, they seem to be an outfit that holds grudges.
You see, they're taking shots at both Eddie Hearn and Canelo Alvarez every other day. They just can't let it go.
Oscar can't let it go. He's like a jilted ex.
Even if a Marlene Esparza rematch isn't a part of Senicia Estrada's immediate future, so long as Marlene is with Golden Boy Promotions, that could be a potential obstacle if and when the time comes. If and when the time comes that Senicia is ready to have that rematch.
Just something to think about.
In men's super middleweight news, David Morrell warns David Benavidez, after my fight, I'm gonna make you my bitch.
David Morrell's supposed to be in action very soon on the undercard of Stephen Fulton versus Daniel Roman.
And he's been pursuing a David Benavidez fight for quite some time now. If he can make it past Calvin Henderson in his next fight, he just might get it. I ain't no bitch. And you're gonna find out, stated Morrell, who holds the WBA's regular title at 168 pounds. I'm from Cuba, and I'm not afraid to fight you. I've beaten bigger and better fighters than you. So right after this fight I've got coming up, get your ass ready.
David Benavidez was recently in action against David Lemieux.
The very statuesque two-time super middleweight champion splattered the former middleweight champion and didn't really have to break a sweat to do it.
David Morrell, who's a lot younger than David Lemieux.
He's nowhere near as experienced as a professional. He only has 6 professional fights on his professional record. This upcoming fight will be his 7th. He's not as experienced as David Lemieux, but physically, he's more adept to the task than David Lemieux.
More adequately proportioned, adequately suited to take on somebody like David Benavidez.
I have business to handle on June 4th against Henderson, a fight I'm taking very seriously, concluded Morrell. After that, I'm on the hunt for Benavidez's head. There is no bitch in me. After my fight, I'm gonna make you my bitch. No need to talk no more. I'm gonna show you better than I can tell you. See you soon, bitch.
The Morrell people must really like David's chances against David Benavidez.
Because he doesn't actually need a David Benavidez fight right now. You're talking about a guy who exhibits a very high ceiling, blue chip prospect, young unbeaten guy, has his whole career ahead of him, and he doesn't actually need a David Benavidez fight right now, but he wants it, and he's wanted it for several months. He's pursued it.
And if they're pursuing a fight with David Benavidez, it has to be because they like their chances.
You see how this guy's talking? He must like his chances. In truth, David Morrell could spend the next 5 or 6 fights fighting journeymen and club fighters the way most guys that are 6-0 fight journeymen and club fighters for their first couple of fights. He doesn't actually need to fight David Benavidez. But this is a guy who's already taken on very experienced fighters, like Alantez Fox,
unbeaten Mario Cazares,
unbeaten Lennox Allen.
I look at a fight like this, I tell myself, this is a fight that is ahead of schedule.
David Morrell's 24 years old, you understand. He's not one of these guys that had an extended amateur career, so extended that by the time he goes pro, he's approaching 30 or is close to it. No, this is a guy who's 24 years old with only 6 pro fights. And that way, if they wanted to slow things down, they actually could. And it would be completely understandable, completely permissible. But they're ambitious. And they like their chances against David Benavidez, a 2-time super middleweight champion who's still an unbeaten fighter.
I like the fight.
And I like David Morrell's confidence, his gamesmanship, that he doesn't exactly need this fight with David Benavidez, but he wants it.
It's a better fight than Benavidez versus Lemieux.
We might get to see it before this year is out because according to David Benavidez himself, Plant, Charlo, and Morrell, he believes we will see those fights next.
No, I don't think Charlo's going to be next.
Jermel Charlo is marking the ETA for David Benavidez as an opponent next year. Caleb Plant, he's still coming off a knockout loss to Canelo.
I don't think that's going to be his first fight back.
David Morrell is a less experienced and less expensive option for David Benavidez and Samson Lukowicz. Caleb Plant, Jermel Charlo, and David Morrell, Benavidez confirmed to Boxing Scene and other reporters. I believe we will see those fights next for me. I feel like if they don't, puts a lot of pressure on them. They're trying to talk this big talk that everyone's scared of them. Well, right now, I'm trying to get the fights with everyone. I'm trying to get the next best thing. If I don't, well, I'm the interim title holder now. They're going to be missing out on a good thing, a fight where they can really put it all on the line.
Because Caleb's coming off a knockout loss, I hardly think his very next fight is going to be David.
I expect that he will get a rebound fight to get himself back in the winner's bracket, a rebound fight before he ends up facing David Benavidez. Jermall Charlo.
He said that fight won't happen till next year.
He's got that Maciej Suliecki fight coming up. Ideally, you'd go from Suliecki to the super middleweight division, but do you really want David Benavidez to be your first fight at the weight? That's the question.
No, I don't think that's what Jermall Charlo wants.
I don't get the sense he wants that to be his very first fight at the weight, and I've never gotten the sense that he's really wanted that fight so much as he's backed into a corner. He can't kick Gennady Golovkin, he can't kick Canelo Alvarez, he's never been interested in Demetrius, and something's got to give. Something's got to happen.
Both him and David are fighting soft competition.
They both are. But the difference between David and Jermall is that when you put David in a showcase fight, that's how the fight ends up playing out, like a showcase fight. I thought he would splatter David Lemieux, and that's exactly what he did in 3 rounds. Whereas Jermall, they put him in these fights where he's supposed to be able to shine, and he's supposed to be able to win, and he ends up underperforming, underwhelming performances.
He didn't splatter Adams, he didn't splatter Montiel.
That's an important detail, that David Benavidez is in fact delivering highlight reel knockouts, even if they are over soft competition, the kind of competition you expect him to be able to beat. He's beating them in a way you expect him to, whereas Jermall is not.
So David's buzzing a little bit right now.
And Jermall isn't, though I don't get the sense that it will be Jermall David faces before this year is out. David Morrell is a less experienced and less expensive option than a Jermall Charlo. Jermall's likely going to want 7 figures for that fight, let's be honest. Something north of $1 million or $1 million, whereas
David Morrell don't cost as much as Jermall Charlo.
If that's what needs to be done, I'll do it, vowed Benavidez. I'm not really the type of person to do stuff like that, but if that's what it takes to get these fights, then I'll do it. We'll see what happens, but I do believe we're really close to making these fights happen.
So maybe Caleb Plant, upon his return, he fights Anthony Durrell.
And if he beats him, maybe he will beat Jermall Charlo's very first fight as a super middleweight. I mean, in between time, maybe David Benavidez takes on David Morrell later on this year.
Provided David Morrell beats Calvin Henderson on the undercard of Fulton versus Roman.
And then, if David Benavidez beats David Morrell, maybe what you do the following year is you do a pay-per-view between David Benavidez and Jermall Charlo. Maybe that's the way that cookie crumbles. Maybe that's the way that all breaks down.
It's not a bad sequence of fights, if I'm being honest.
If that's the way the cookie crumbles, if that's the way it all breaks down. Caleb Plant versus Jermall Charlo, David Benavidez versus David Morrell, and then the winners of those 2 respective fights lock horns with each other next year.
We'll see if it does. We'll see if it happens that way.
Finally, another angle of some comments Javonte Davis made, another angle of a story we already talked about here on the channel, what he told Devin Haney. If you beat George Kambosos, I'm now out of my contract. Let's make the fight happen.
He's not serious.
Of course he isn't. I said as much earlier this week. Javonte Davis and his dry call-out. He says he's an email champion. That's what Javonte said. He said he's fighting because somebody mailed him the belt. Did that ever happen in boxing? He's talking crazy. Come on. He said all that.
As if defending a secondary title against Rolly Romero is any better.
That's the only kind of title that's on the line in that fight. A secondary title, the lesser version of George Kambosos Jr.'s title. I mean, if we're going to belittle and berate Devin Haney for the version of a title that he holds a full title.
Full belt.
Javonte Davis is defending a secondary one.
He's not going to fight the winner of that fight.
And that's what we're really here to talk about. You know, what happens if Devin Haney beats George Kambosos Jr.? Well, I think, depending on the fashion that he beats him, if he were to by some chance pull it off and beat him on points, I expect that George Kambosos would exercise his rematch clause, because he has one.
I don't think Javonte Davis is aware of that.
But this thing between Devin and George, it could end up being a 2-fight engagement. Should Devin Haney win, George Kambosos may exercise his rematch clause. If George wins...
Oh, well, then Devin's shit out of luck.
And George, I don't know, maybe he defends a title against Vasyl Lomachenko upon Vasyl Lomachenko's return, or he defends his titles against one of his mandatory challengers, of which he'll have 4.
The winner of Haney versus Kambosos ain't gonna end up fighting Javonte Davis.
And that's what makes Javonte Davis's bold proclamation a dry call-out.
He's not serious.
Not serious about making a fight with the winner of that fight, and neither are his handlers for the time being. All this talk about Javonte Davis's contract with Mayweather Promotions being up.
Much ado about nothing.
Provided he wins tonight's fight with Rolando Romero, I don't expect him to leave the platform, even if he does end up leaving Mayweather Promotions, whether he does or doesn't leave Mayweather Promotions. So long as he's fighting on the Showtime platform, the political boundary lines that prevent certain fights from happening, they will still be there.
See, the way it breaks down.
Mayweather Promotions is just a subsidiary of Al Heyman's PBC, and so long as Javonte Davis is under that umbrella in some way, shape, or form, what Al's gonna do is put the best interests of his network affiliate ahead of the best interests of his fighter.
There might be bigger and better fights for Javonte on some other side of the street.
Bigger and better purses, too. Legacy fights, the kind of fights that fight fans want to see him in. Those kinds of fights, they might be on some other side of the street, but Al, he don't care about that. What he cares about is the best interests of his network affiliate that gives him a budget. In this situation, that's Showtime.
This is the conflict of interest that creates when you're acting as both a promoter and a manager, or an advisor.
A lot of people don't like to call Al Heyman a promoter by definition, but that's very much what he is, brokering deals with networks. And you can't put the best interests of both the network affiliate and the fighter.
No, because sometimes it's not the same thing.
What might benefit the fighter financially may not benefit the network affiliate, not necessarily. You know, the fighter might benefit from crossing over to some other side of the street where there's a big fight for him and a big purse to go with it, but Al's network affiliate, they don't benefit from that.
So when you advise a Javonte Davis to reject an offer like a DAZN offer...
What was it, $7 or $8 million to cross over there in a one-off situation and take on Tevin Farmer in what was then a unification match? When you advise him to reject that offer and reject that money, whose best interests do you really have in mind? Javonte Davis's? Or Showtime?
You know the answer.
And this is what I mean when I say that leaving Mayweather Promotions doesn't necessarily mean that Javonte Davis is leaving Al Heyman or the Showtime platform. And so long as he's on the Showtime platform, the matchmaking will remain the same.
What that means is don't look for him to fight the winner of that fight.
The winner of Haney versus Kambosos. There are several reasons I can think of for Javonte Davis to not end up fighting the winner of that fight. One among them is that the winner of that fight, whoever it ends up being, they're not going to fight on the cheap. You know, you can't pay the winner of that fight what you pay a Rolly Romero or an Isaac Cruz or a Yuriorkis
The
Gamboa.
winner of that fight, whoever it ends up being, ain't gonna fight on the cheap.
And depending on who the winner of that fight is, it may end up being a two-fight engagement. Couple that with the winner of that fight being in bed with Top Rank and ESPN. That's the broadcast partner for that fight here in the United States. ESPN and Top Rank, they are involved.
There's no sense in being coy and naive about this stuff.
There really isn't. All those fighters on that side of the street, the PBC side of things, they may as well be in a different division, a different universe even.
Whether Javonte knocks out Rolly or Rolly knocks out Javonte.
Rolly knocks out Javonte Davis later on today, they'll do a rematch. If he loses and he gets himself knocked out, Javonte will then move into, in all likelihood, an Isaac Cruz rematch, a second fight with that guy.
And if the pay-per-view buys for this fight are better than they were for Javonte Davis's last fight,
The last thing they're going to do is send him over to ESPN and Top Rank. The last thing they're going to do is try to broker a deal with them to do a fight with one of their fighters. They're going to stay the course and keep everything in-house so they can be the sole beneficiaries of whatever revenue his fights generate.
that's what it's all about. They don't want to have to split the pie with anybody.
Now, I don't know why so many people spend so much time speculating over this story. I myself have been saying it for weeks. I don't expect anything dramatic to happen. The most dramatic thing that can happen is Rolly Romero wins the fight.